everybody. My name is Sumit Sharma. I work in a company called MuleSoft, and we're headquartered in San Francisco, but we also have offices in London, a big office in Buenos Aires, and the east coast of the United States, and as well as Sydney and Asia Pac as well. But happy to be here. I actually came here especially for the Nordic APIs Tour and the API Strategy Conference in Amsterdam last week. So I'm sort of our flag bearer of APIs at MuleSoft, and really excited that there's such a good turnout here, and congratulations to Andreas and team for kind of putting this up. So great stuff. So like I said, I'm excited to be in Copenhagen. I always start on a personal note, and I'm from Vancouver originally, and normally we're listed in the top 5 of places to be, and we're kind of happy, but you guys are number 1, so that's a big deal. So that's pretty cool. But I'm also a big beer fan, and there's a place where we're based in San Francisco. It's become my new watering hole. Actually, my whole team and I, we always go to this place. It's a Mikla bar in San Francisco, and so I'm kind of excited to be here because there's a Mikla bar a few blocks away from here, and I'm actually going to make sure before I fly to go grab a beer there. And so I invite everyone here who is ready to kind of join me for a beer after this to kind of let's go and grab a beer at the Mikla bar if you're interested. And so this is where our office is. And this is San Francisco. So that's work, and that's where we walk. It's a 10-minute walk, so I'm not lying. So it's kind of cool that we have a Mikla bar over here. So so those of you who've been to San Francisco, we have this is where all the big conferences are, like the Moscone Center and Union Square. So we're right there in downtown. But anyways, let's talk about B2B. So business to business. So if you were to look at how business to business has been, I don't think there's going to be major kind of big changes coming in the near future. I don't feel like objectives are what people are trying to do in business to business is changing. It's all about trying to create value for one another. There's a value chain. There's raw materials all the way to the end customer and distributors and manufacturers and VARs and OEMs. So it's all about mutual benefit here. So basically, everyone's trying to securely do business with each other in a reliable way. So everyone in this ecosystem is a trading partner. So the one thing that I think is changing is who the trading partners are. So we're seeing a bit of an explosion of all sorts of the effects of cloud computing and the effects of digitization that is creating all sorts of new sorts of point solutions. And I think that's a big thing around now, how B2B is going to get impacted. So the objectives and the motives aren't changing, but it's how that ecosystem and the landscape is evolving. So how are APIs going to factor into this? How do they come in? I'd like to take us on a little journey and a little story about that. So this is our traditional B2B cycle, starting from some sort of a, more or less starting in a factory, ending at a consumer. So pretty much, let's now deep dive into how this has kind of come along over the last 20, 30 years, because I think it'll kind of give us good context into sort of how APIs are going to change the game. So let's double click into one of these constituents. So before, the main method of businesses to kind of communicate with each other was through EDI, and is still EDI. And that's not going away. And EDI, phone, fax, and email, and some file transfers has pretty much been the standard way of businesses communicating with each other when we're talking about order processing and supply chains and stuff like that. And there's been some manual processes inside the companies. And then they decided to buy some ERPs and started to buy SAP and all that. And now there's a little bit more automation, more enterprise footprint in these big software vendors. But more or less, largely, we've still seen phone, fax, and email, as well as EDI, as well as some file transfer type stuff going on. And there's a company called, phone, fax, and email should not be underestimated. This is something that, there's a company called Li & Fung. Who's heard of Li & Fung over here? So I'm not actually surprised, because Li & Fung is very much a company that's under 2 layers of any kind of consumer facing. So it's a true B2B company. It's, there's a statistic that 80% of all clothes in US malls that are getting sold are sourced through Li & Fung. So Li & Fung is headquartered in Hong Kong, and most of our clothes, I guarantee in this room, are sort of made somewhere in Asia. And Li & Fung is this company that is basically orchestrating all the orders and the manufacturing processes across countries like Thailand, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, India, wherever the whole East is. And so Li and Feng basically has developed specifications for communicating with with the factory here, and a worker here, and a manufacturer here, and a distributor here. Basically, they'll go down to the level of saying, okay, we have a color code for blue, and there'll be 20 tones of blue, because we're looking at real companies like American Eagle and American Outfitters and Gap and Banana Republic and all these companies sourcing their stuff through Li and Feng. And so there's 20 shades of blue, and Li and Feng has a spec on saying, okay, whenever we want something that's navy blue, it's going to be code number 17, and it's going to be a shirt, which is code number 30, and it's going to be a certain color, which is code number 40, and you can imagine there's just a spec, and they basically phone, fax, and email that across their whole network. So phone, fax, and email is very much alive. And the problem, though, is that because they're so distributed in areas and villages where there's no internet connectivity or there's bad infrastructure and all that, they still have to rely on phone, fax, and email. It's a very real problem today. So I really want to underscore that. People are saying, oh, it's pretty much all digital. It's really phone, fax, and email in a lot of countries. But with cloud computing, and so I've actually talked to a few folks in Li and Feng, and they're very interested in seeing how they can use very small point cloud computing applications by kind of to try and automate some of their processes. So it is changing, but it's a very real problem, phone, fax, and email. So anyways, so this is what happened maybe 10, 15 years ago, and then over time, they were like, oh, wow, okay, let's develop some web services. Let's try and maybe develop some abstraction on top of those so that we can actually provide a little bit more business-facing, business-relevant services to our partners. And so along came some sort of services abstraction. And this is sort of what's been happening today, and we see some SOAP web services getting exposed to partners. And so that's been happening and is happening today. And now what's happening is obviously we're seeing a lot of cloud services coming up, and now they're starting to, folks are starting to develop some RESTful APIs and saying, okay, let's try this out, see how this is going, and using cloud services as well to expose and actually host a lot of information around the B2B chain. And now what's also happening, of course, is devices coming up, and now what we're seeing is machine-to-machine B2B interoperability. So it's not just about what's happening in an order processing chain, but it's also about what can this machine do with another machine in another business, and how can that be used in a B2B context. So in summary, we're moving from a world that looks like this, where it's basically pretty much been EDI and various standards of EDI and phone, fax, and email, to a world that looks like this, where now we're having all these sorts of different parties coming up and all sorts of connection points and all sorts of things that need to happen. And so the big thing here is that, EDI is not going away, but it's definitely in the rearview mirror. So it's not going to die, it's not dead, but it is in the rearview mirror. And now what's happening is we are seeing lots and lots of RESTful APIs coming up. But the question is, why are we not seeing enough? And why are we not seeing new models coming up? Well, first of all, and this comes to the previous speaker, by the way, great talk. It was basically, look, we've got to convince our businesses about, okay, this is about delivering new experiences to your partners and actually ideating with our business partners and saying, this is how our partners would actually love to work with us. Because at the end of the day, partners are looking out for themselves, and they really want to know how they can accelerate and get better experiences with you together. So that's one thing, is we need to do a better job of that. Another thing is, we need to share our data with our partners. And so enabling this data that has never been in purview of our partners to really educate them and understand how we can use this in a mutually beneficial way. And I know in all of your companies you can think of many examples of how you can do this. Another one is obviously having all these processes that you have. Look at Walmart, look at Amazon. One thing that Amazon does is it outsources a lot of its fulfillment. It API-ifies a lot of its fulfillment processes, or Walmart does that too internally, to its partners. And so it's actually, you're allowed to leverage some of their infrastructure and their processes to kind of help their partner network come up. And it's obviously in their favor to kind of empower their B2B ecosystem to do this. And so a lot of this is possible through APIs. And of course, I think this is the most powerful one, which is basically, joint ideation, joint kind of synergistic thinking around trying to, take your product and your services further. So basically, we can do all sorts of things that we couldn't have done before, and this is where B2B APIs are going to come in. So we have this old world, it's not going away, but this other new world that needs to kind of come up is going to be empowered through APIs, and of course, many more things that I think we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg, and I want to be mindful of having another iceberg slide in a different context here, so I will not have an iceberg slide. But things around machine-to-machine B2B interoperability is going to be a huge thing. So I think hopefully I'm convincing you here that basically B2B strategy really, really needs an API strategy. And so what does an API strategy really mean? And this again comes back to the previous speaker. I feel that we can have an API strategy, but if we do not have humans involved in that process, then we have a problem. And so, because at the end of the day, look at Li and Feng, it's about trying to make the experience of that factory worker easier in selecting in making sure and reducing human error, because you have 20 color codes and you want to select a single color code that is going to make sure is right for that shirt. And right now they're using their eyes based on a fax machine to look at, oh, okay, it's this color code, and let me now put this color of dye in the shirt. That's a human error. That's a human process. It's prone to human error. So we have to look at human processes in our B2B chain and really look down at defining our APIs in that context. And so that's really important. And I think we've been talking about, well, why aren't we seeing APIs? And that was again in the previous talk. What can we do to why is cloud computing such a buzzword, but APIs not? Well, first of all, I think APIs is too technical a term. Application programming interface is a very technical term. If I talk to all my business friends, I have to educate them on what an API is, and they'll kind of get it, but talking that language is not intuitive to them. Whereas cloud computing, oh, great, okay, yeah, okay. So basically with cloud computing, I get to save on all these fixed costs, and I only run a variable cost business now, and I have increased agility because now I don't have to spend 6 months bringing up this infrastructure if it's a software or hardware. And so I'm able to go to time to market in 1 month. Bam! That's cloud computing. How easy is that? So we need to come up with that kind of language with APIs. And I think right now and it's very natural, I think we're very much in a natural progression of where we are with APIs, but I think that is one of the reasons why APIs is not the standard business conversation. We don't have that kind of tight. So, like I said, it's about business value to humans. And what does that mean? Well, I've talked to actually quite a few of you here, and you're all having some sort of challenges around, you want to, enable, digital brand engagement. You want to get closer to your customers. You want to understand what your customers want, and you want to enable your partners to help in that process. And so you want to help your partners get their field better enabled through iPads and apps and stuff like that. So there's a ton of human problems that we have to solve here. So, B2B, business to business. And so I would argue that we have a new trend occurring where it's actually getting into more of a business process-driven business to business. So, the way I like to look at it is, APIs, we're coming up with, before very few APIs existed in the way at least we see it today. APIs have been around for a long time, but at least in the paradigm we see it today, we were looking at very few APIs, and there was APIs from monolithic to monolithic big systems, and again, very little human processes. It was more about kind of exchanging data between big systems and abstracted 3 tiers below. And then, okay, now let's do some service orientation and try and figure out some APIs that make some business value. And that was probably 20% of the way there. We were making some good inroads because we were looking at business processes. We were then kind of trying to decompose it into more loosely modular components that represented business processes. That was good start. And of course, now all sorts of APIs, as we call it today, the open APIs and a bunch of APIs for various other things. But I think what's now the next stage of progression is more of the business process type APIs. And I don't know what the name of that is. I don't know if we should call it API or if we should call it a BPI, a business programming interface. Who knows? But the question is, do we want to, I'm not trying to say we should not use the term APIs, but I think somehow I'm challenging this group here that there's some paradigm shift that needs to happen so that we can get this into a business conversation. So the way I like to look at it is when I have an idea with somebody, the first thing I do is I go to a whiteboard. I actually say, okay guys, let's go and write some ideas down because visual thinking really helps. And so what if we could whiteboard an API? And what does that even mean? What does it mean to whiteboard an API? Because we're talking about developers here that are actually creating the APIs and developers that are actually consuming the APIs, and where does a whiteboard really come in? But I like to challenge us to think about relationships and what are you trying to whiteboard here? We're whiteboarding relationships. We're whiteboarding transactions. And so what I like to think is, transaction-driven APIs is the same thing as doing design-first APIs. So we're actually coming in with an outside-in perspective. And so, the way I like to look at it is, before our APIs were, we were doing a lot of server side. We were coding the APIs server side first, obviously, and that's how it is, through code. And it was meant for machine readability. So you're doing stuff around, one application consuming another service and data from another application. And now we're getting into a place where maybe some people are trying to define an API from a spec first. Normally they'd kind of do some auto generation. So they'd say, okay, here's my API, here's some annotations I've got in my code. I'm going to now use JAX-RS, and I'm going to create some sort of API spec out of that. And so I have an API spec. But that was basically for this audience here. But what I'm going to challenge us is, well, let's have something where we can actually have it driven and be talking the language of this, where it's basically process and partnership descriptions in your API. And so how can we then have this talk to this and back and forth? I think that's a big challenge. We have specs today, lots of specs today that I think are making good progress towards this goal, but I don't think there's any sort of API spec today that enables us to kind of talk about business-driven APIs. We're getting there, though. So, what this means is we need to think outside in. We need to think in terms of what are we trying to achieve here, and what is the APX? What is that API user experience? What does that even mean? And what is that user experience we're trying to convey? What does that relationship look like? And so, design it first and then implement it. That's one way to do it. And so, what is desirable in that spec? Well, I think it should be, comprehensive, not overly complex. And we talked about, I think over the last few days in Amsterdam, there's been lots of great presentations on various specifications of APIs today. And I think we started off obviously with web services, and the web service description language, WSDL, gave a lot of people a headache, but it was the only thing that was available for that. And Waddle sort of emerged out of that thinking, and web application description language, and that gives a lot of people a headache because it reminds them of the SOAP days, because it's it's comprehensive. It's very comprehensive. It's good that way, but it's very verbose. I think Swagger has been doing a great job at holding that flag around. Okay, it's using more modern. It's JSON based. It's taking it forward into more of a RESTful appropriate world. It's very verbose, and we were thinking, well, what else can they be? What can we use that makes an API much more human readable? And so, RAML is one of the options that we think is actually a really good one, where it looks like we're an API. This is what an API is. And it couldn't get any more simpler than that. But now I'm not saying here that this is what a business person is going to identify. So I'm not saying that a business person is actually going to come and say, yes, let's create a resource called users, and we're going to now create, order ID as one of the parameters, and we're going to say, let's do a get and a patch and delete. Obviously not. A business user is never going to do that, because that's just too technical. So I'm not, but it's a step in the right direction. Trying to get into more of a human readable API specification, it's very important. So, I think RAML is one of those specifications that allows us to kind of take one step further. Not saying it's the answer, but it's one step further, where basically it's an open source specification. It's available on raml.org, and it's open source, so you guys should feel free to just kind of go around and play with it and understand it. And it's actually got a lot of rich tool sets and community coming up, and it's got a great API designer tool that'll help you kind of get underway and start this process of defining an API pretty easily. So it takes me to the topic of B2B being something around this a developer in the business to the developer in the business. But again, I don't think that's the way it should be, because we are missing that human. We're missing that business process relevance. So it's a developer plus the human in the business. So it's a joint collaboration between what is a human process that we're trying to solve here. What are those real human kind of issues we're trying to solve here? And that comes from your business goals. So if you're trying to say, I want to understand how my customers are using my product, that's a real business goal. That's a benefit. If you can say, we're going to get visibility into our customers' usage of our products, well, let's now map out what that looks like. And I guarantee you, if you do that, you'll come to an answer which is eventually an API. But right now, what we're doing is we're saying, we have this problem, let's define an API. And there's all this stuff in the middle that we're missing. So the thing that we need to do is figure out what this stuff is, and this is where that thinking comes in. And so, I like to think of this example here, which is the Boeing 787. I love planes. I've always studied planes since I was a young kid. And this is a very modern plane. It's a big rival of the Airbus, I think A340 or something like that. But it's a good plane, very complex to put together. You can see how this was sourced. You can see how this was sort of manufactured and where it came from. And very complex. They had to make a special plane just to carry this from Italy to Everett near Seattle. And you know, this is from Kansas, and they had to make another special kind of plane and carry that. But the point is, to get to our business goal, to get to realizing our business goal, all the stuff in the middle that I was referring to, it's very complex. So getting to this state is not easy. But we have to realize that there is stuff in the middle that we need to do. And then only then, I think, APIs will become like cloud computing. And so kind of figuring out what that framework looks like is what's going to get us into that. Now, okay, APIs are getting adopted in the enterprise. So going from this world again, where it was a simple supply chain-like B2B relationships, to a world like this, where now you've got companies with connected devices and companies using cloud applications and companies coming up with APIs. This involves a lot of work, and it actually can get really messy. Because now what happens is you have all these companies talking to each other, and it's just a big mash of spaghetti right here in the middle, because now you have all these collaborations that are possible and people getting excited, and it gets really messy. So it's a real problem that, you know, this is what's going to happen. This is already what's happening. And you know, the consumerization of IT is already well underway, and the consumerization of B2B is going to be underway too. So it's going to be another big problem, I'd say. But of course, where do we start? And of course, like any other good API answer, let's start pragmatically. And so let's, you know, most of you hopefully will understand this environment. This is pretty much, well, give or take, what we see in enterprises today, you know, in general. You know, we have some typical packaged apps, some custom applications and databases and EDWs. And I probably should add in things like Salesforce and modern cloud applications here too. So we have that as well. So Box and Salesforce and Workday and all that, that's all over here. You probably built some services on top of that to sort of abstract across them in general. And then you have some EDI stuff going on where you're working with the EDI partners with certain kind of, you know, you've been doing this for 20 years, you're not going to change it, and it's not going to change. And so, okay, we're comfortable with our EDI. McDonald's, Walmart, and all these other big Fortune 500 retail companies and energy companies, they're going to use EDI and they're comfortable with that. And of course, they have some sort of a stack to enable some sort of SOAP web services, probably involving, you know, some SOAP to XML to JMS and JMS to MQ and some sort of stack like that, and probably involves, you know, some sort of middleware and orchestration engines and all that. So pretty much on the same page here, guys, right? This is pretty much what a stack looks like in enterprise today. So where do we come in with APIs? Well, I think this is what's happening. So people are kind of experimenting with APIs around in the B2B context. They're like, okay, let's put APIs on top of SOAP and abstract from, you know, REST JSON to SOAP XML and kind of do some mapping there, and let's build up some apps and see how that goes and experiment. And I think what's happening more is now they're like, okay, that's working out pretty well. Screw the SOAP services. Let's have these REST services sit on top of this other stack and actually build some mappings directly to our lower-end bindings. And you know, starting to creep up this way, more and more REST apps will come in, and then maybe over time, we'll see a little bit more of the REST apps, actually REST APIs kind of getting into your enterprise. Now, internal IT is starting to notice and be like, oh, okay, cool. Actually, this is actually involving all these benefits like internal agility for my intra-enterprise. So it's not just about partners, but IT will be like, oh, okay, cool. This is internal APIs are a great thing, and dare I say, we might even get to this point or to that point. This is my favorite part of the presentation. Look at that. Ooh. Okay, so one more time. Okay, all right, so that's what might happen, and dare I say something like that, where the entire enterprise is API enabled, all sorts of service orientation type stuff going on, where you're like building APIs that are representative of very, very fine-grained processes, and then you're going to build some APIs that are more contextual to businesses. And this is where API-first design will, I think, make a big benefit, where you actually now will, in this whole design process, you'll just start here, and you'll start to kind of find commonalities, and this should be shared by this and this and all that. And I think it's almost like how you define with SOA and how SOA was done. It's not too different. But I think the difference here is that it's going to be developer-driven and business process human-driven as well. So in closing, I have about 4 or 5 takeaways. First one, EDI is dead, but it's not going away. So let's make room for the API. So it's going to stay. It's in the rearview mirror. Number two, B2B strategy is about human strategy. So it's about that ability to kind of whiteboard and understand what problems you're trying to solve. Number three is, this is a big one that should not be overlooked, where you want to accommodate for all the various endpoints and touch points in the enterprise and avoid all that spaghetti code immediately by avoiding point-to-point connections. So that's very important. And the last one is, REST is not going to eat up all the world, it's just going to eat up most of it. Okay? So hopefully we'll get to that point in B2B. So this is not going to go away. That's probably what's going to happen. And number five, let's go grab some beers after this. So I'm not even joking. I'm actually going to do this, guys. So here's where we are. And it's a little walk to Mikla Bar. So I'm probably going to leave it around 5 or 5:15. So if anyone's interested in talking about B2B and more APIs, let's go do that. Anyone interested? All right, cool. That's it.